Russians are fleeing the country en masse.
Europe hasn't seen large-scale warfare like the current war in Ukraine since World War II, almost a century in the past. And unlike the Red Army in 1945, the war in Ukraine is not going well for Putin and the Russian Federation. And by not going well, I mean a complete disaster. Many were surprised by this. Even after the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union, many still viewed what is now known as the Russian Federation as a sleeping bear of sorts, a powerful nation with a large and capable military that came second only to the United States. It was expected by the Kremlin and indeed many other observers that Ukraine simply could not withstand a full-scale invasion, but it did. And now, it looks like Ukraine might even be winning the war. On paper, it doesn't make sense. Russia's military capability is several times bigger than Ukraine's. They have more tanks, more men, more aircraft. Russia also spends over 10 times more on its military budget when compared to Ukraine. So, what is going on? How is Ukraine doing this? Is it because Russian troops are demoralized and don't want to fight? Is it due to the US's role in supplying intelligence to the Ukrainian military? Or maybe international sanctions, cutting Russia off and strangling its financial umbilical cord? All of these things and more almost certainly play some kind of role. But there is one thing, a specific high-tech weapon that has had a profound effect on the ground war in particular. So much so that Putin himself has directly issued orders to destroy it, whatever the cost, and by any means necessary. This weapon is the M142 High Mobility Artillery Rocket System, better known as HIMARS, and it might just turn the tide of the entire war. So, let's find out how. To understand the impact of HIMARS on 21st century warfare, first we need to take a step back in time and examine how military doctrine has changed throughout human history. Ancient battles and wars were very static and cumbersome in nature when compared to modern combat. The mobility of armies was often limited to men on foot and mounted troops in the form of cavalry. There were no planes, missiles, or motor vehicles. As a result, if you wanted to reposition soldiers or attack key enemy positions, you had to physically send your army there, often by foot if travel by sea was not an option. You also had to fight your way through any enemy opposition on the way. Even with the introduction of gunpowder in the 14th century and subsequent adoption of cannon and muskets, warfare at its core didn't really change much throughout the ages. From the Roman legionnaire at the Battle of Cannae to the French knight at Agincourt, or the Union soldier at the Battle of Gettysburg. Moving to the early 20th century, World War I is often considered the first modern war, incorporating machines and technology like machine guns, planes, and a very early ancestor of the HIMARS, the artillery gun, or howitzer as it's also known. And although this weapon was responsible for well over half of the total casualties in World War I, it had one major flaw. It could only provide indirect fire because there was no direct line of sight to whatever target it was firing upon. Fast forward to World War II, artillery and combined arms doctrine had evolved, but the same flaws persisted. It was often very difficult to locate targets. You needed aerial reconnaissance or soldiers within visual and radio distance. Even then, communications between what was often called the artillery observer and the artillery battery at the rear of the front lines could be difficult. And even if you were able to locate a target, you still had to hit it by effectively launching chunks of unguided high explosive into the air and hoping they would land near the target. This was also the case for more high-tech weaponry like the German V2 rocket or Soviet Katyusha rocket launcher. And although the range of many artillery guns was in the tens of kilometers, this often wasn't enough to reach key enemy targets deep behind enemy lines, like command posts, ammunition depots, or supply lines. And land artillery was pretty cumbersome. It would take a decent amount of time to move to a new position and be set up to fire. Not to mention, you generally needed multiple artillery guns to provide an effective barrage. So, what if I told you that 50 years after World War II, the artillery gun got a massive upgrade? An upgrade that would make it one of the most devastating weapons of the 21st century. HIMARS combines the best features of both the Katyusha rocket artillery and conventional artillery of World War II. It's all in the name, High Mobility Artillery Rocket System. It's essentially a big rocket launcher and can be mounted on standard army truck frames for excellent mobility. HIMARS was originally developed in the 90s by the US and other NATO countries and is manufactured by Lockheed Martin Systems. It saw action in conflicts such as Afghanistan and Iraq, but the war in Ukraine is the first time HIMARS has been used in a near-peer conflict against a technologically equal enemy. So, why is it so effective? Well, if you consider traditional artillery like the Katyusha and howitzer as dumb, HIMARS is the smart version. Its most commonly fired munition, the GMLRS, or Guided Multiple Launch Rocket System, uses a combination of GPS-aided guidance and an onboard computer, known as the Inertial Navigation System. This technology allows HIMARS to hit targets at ranges of up to 92 kilometers with an accuracy within just a few meters. And with a warhead packed with 91 kilos of high explosives, the damage is catastrophic. And those are just the strikes we've seen in action so far. HIMARS also has the option of being equipped with a single ATA CMS missile, or Army Tactical Missile System, which contains 2.5 times more high explosive in its warhead and has 3 times the range, up to 300 kilometers. HIMARS is also insanely mobile. It takes just 20 seconds to ready the rockets to be fired, and within 45 seconds, all 6 rockets can be launched. As a result, once a HIMARS unit has received targeting information either from satellite, intelligence, or troops on the ground, it can come out of hiding, for example from under a bridge, and deliver its entire payload within minutes, before quickly exiting the area to avoid enemy counterattack. This mobility and speed is incredibly important for Ukraine because Russia has air and naval superiority, meaning Ukraine simply does not have the option of tactical airstrikes, launching missiles from the sea via their navy, or even effectively using traditional artillery on the ground. Furthermore, the sheer range of HIMARS gives Ukraine the immensely important tactical ability to take out targets deep behind enemy lines. Targets that traditionally would have been safe, like command posts, headquarters, ammunition depots, and supply lines, like bridges, roads, or even airports. And Russia doesn't really have a good answer to combat HIMARS. On paper, there are some weapons that should be able to, but they're not very effective due to the artillery-like trajectory and speed of HIMARS rockets. Once launched, the GMLRS rockets reach speeds of Mach 2.5, or nearly 3,000 kilometers per hour. It takes them just 90 seconds to reach targets 80 kilometers away. These rockets also fly at altitudes far lower than any cruise or ballistic missile, giving Russian air defense little time to notice them, react, and intercept. This also means Russia's famed S-300 and S-400 missile systems are next to useless. Even if they were able to intercept HIMARS rockets, each missile costs between $1 and $2 million, compared to just $100,000 for the HIMARS GMLRS. And don't forget, the sheer mobility of HIMARS is also proving to be one of its greatest strengths. It's almost impossible to locate and destroy. In fact, in October 2017, a US Marine Corps HIMARS even fired a rocket while at sea against a land target from the deck of the amphibious transport dock USS Anchorage, demonstrating the system's ability to operate while on ships to deliver precision fire from a standoff range against shore defenses. There just isn't any effective way for the Russian military to counter such cutting-edge technology. As a result, Vladimir Putin has made the destruction of every HIMARS weapons system in Ukraine to be a top priority. In response, the US decided to send an additional 18 HIMARS units, tripling the amount currently active in the war. So now we know what HIMARS is and why it's so effective. How has Ukraine managed to take advantage of it? Well, by targeting ammunition depots, supply lines, and command posts, the Ukrainians can accomplish several things. Firstly, the modern Russian military still employs outdated Soviet-era warfighting doctrine in many areas, specifically by implementing slow and inefficient supply lines and by having a hyper-centralized command and control system that doesn't allow for much initiative from lower-ranked commanders on the ground. Officers at the lieutenant, captain, and major level have almost zero autonomy and can only act when specifically ordered to do something. By taking out command posts, these Russian units are left in limbo and may not receive updated orders for hours or even days. This was made obvious when Russia appeared to be incapable of quickly deconcentrating its ammunition and supply depots, which could have saved its munitions in the occupied parts of Ukraine. The impact of the Ukrainian strategy was immediate, crippling the already weakened and demoralized Russian army. How can you fight a war when your soldiers have no food, no ammunition for their weapons, and even no orders from their commanders? And you can see this when examining the Ukrainian counteroffensive in August. The Ukrainian army, which on paper is much smaller than their Russian counterpart, was able to recapture a huge amount of territory near Kharkiv in the east and inflict severe damage upon Russian forces in the south near Kherson. The Ukrainians used satellite imagery, intelligence, and small reconnaissance teams behind enemy lines to target and destroy key Russian positions via HIMARS. And then they punched through the Russian lines, often encircling entire units of the Russian army in the process. Now, it's important to note that HIMARS is not solely responsible for the valiant defiance of Ukraine. There are a number of factors to take into consideration, like the bravery of the Ukrainian people, the support from NATO and other sympathetic countries, and also the extremely poor performance of the Russian military. It's unknown exactly what effect the HIMARS platform will have on the war or its outcome. Only time will tell.